Hello class, and welcome to week 6. We're going to be focusing on energy and enzymes. We're going to be talking about the cells and all of the reactions that are happening within cells to make them work. We can talk about all of those reactions by the term metabolism. That's the sum of all of the reactions in the body. We're also going to be talking about thermodynamics and the study of energy transformations. So when we look at this picture back here with all these dots, you can say, well, what is any of that? Hopefully by the end of this unit, it'll make a little bit more sense. But what those are showing are metabolic pathways. We're going to be talking about how we can take one starting molecule, one reactant, and how an enzyme can convert it into a different product. So this green can become blue. It can then have a different reaction and turn blue into brown. And another reaction can turn it into pink or salmon colored. So all these different types of pathways that we're going to be focusing on, we can break down into thinking of them as two different types. We can break down into energy releasing pathways, where you are taking a polymer and you're breaking it down into its individual parts. So this is breaking things down, and this is going to release energy. We're going to release the energy that's stored in those chemical bonds. This we're going to see is what happens in aerobic respiration. Now, anabolic pathways, and the term that we use for this of breaking down and releasing energy is a catabolic pathway. Anabolic pathways, however, are the exact opposite. Anabolic pathways use energy to build up larger structures, to build up polymers from monomers, and this uses energy. So we can easily see, or hopefully you made the connection of these two different pathways for the foods that we eat to be able to do all the stuff that our cells need to do. So we break down the foods we eat into those monomers and into their parts, and as a result, we release energy. We use that energy to build those molecules back into all the stuff that is making up our cells. Now we can talk about the energy in order to do them. So energy is the capacity to do work, and there's different types of energy. There's different forms of energy, the things that you're familiar with, like light or energy that's in a battery, or kinetic energy, where something is moving, or that chemical energy stored in the bonds of those different atoms. So there's different types of energies. There's even energy stored in gradients by those different concentrations that we saw in the previous chapter. When you have a higher concentration and a lower concentration, that's that potential energy from the movement of those molecules to reach equilibrium. So I've got more pages here on different types of potential energy and chemical bond energy. Sunlight is another good one, but we'll focus on some examples of this study of thermodynamics. So we can have a person that's high up here. Where's my mouse? That's high up here. They're going to have more potential energy that can be converted into kinetic energy as they're moving. Now this person down here has less potential energy than this person. That energy went into moving them from up here down to the water. Now this person has kinetic energy and is moving, and she's increasing her potential energy, but she's breaking those chemical bonds to give her that kinetic energy. Another example is, how do we move in a steam train? So you may not have ever thought about it, but what is happening in a coal-powered train? You are taking coal, you are burning those carbon-carbon bonds that are making up a hydrocarbon, which is what coal is. It's mostly just carbons. And you're warming up water, which takes a lot of energy, of course, because those water molecules are making and breaking hydrogen bonds all the time. But that water eventually is going to get hot enough to be steam, and it's going to physically turn a piston. So we have chemical energy being converted into heat energy, being converted into mechanical energy. Another example is the thermodynamics of a car. So we don't use steam to move a car, but we have gasoline, which is again a hydrocarbon, and we are going to be storing energy, so its potential energy is in that gasoline. Now we light it on fire in a combustion engine, and we can convert that potential energy into the kinetic energy and the movement of that vehicle. But what you see here is that we started with 100 units of chemical energy, but we only got 25 units of kinetic energy out of it. Most of that energy is becoming heat energy and isn't utilized for the major function. This is also what we can think of as a food chain. A food chain is the conversion of energy, is the movement of chemical bonds and that energy from one organism to another. From those primary producers that are taking sunlight energy and converting it into sugar, to those primary consumers that then are eating those producers. It's a flow of energy through the food chain. So what we've just been talking about are the laws of thermodynamics. The first law of thermodynamics states that energy cannot be created or destroyed. All that's happening is it gets converted from one type of energy to another. And we're going to see the second law of thermodynamics states that when these conversions are occurring, you're always going to lose some energy to heat. The second law states that energy is converted from more useful to less useful. And that in this process, we are going to make the world more disordered. That term more disordered, it's a complex term. It's called entropy. And what it's stating is as each time you pass and you change from one type to another, you're going to lose a little bit. So let's give some examples to make this make sense. We can think of a room. We can think of a room that is more ordered. As it's more ordered, someone had put a lot of energy into that to get it that way. And it then has a lot more potential energy. As a result of having more potential energy, it is less stable, meaning there is less entropy. In this state of disorder, which we all know, it's so much easier to have something less organized. There is less potential energy, but it is more stable. So you're not putting effort into cleaning your room is because it is more stable and you've increased the entropy in the world. Another example, which is going to be relevant in photosynthesis and respiration, is thinking about these two sides of this membrane. There is an unequal distribution of hydrogen ions in this picture that is highly more ordered. There is more potential energy. This is going to be less stable. Where you have this even distribution, that is going to have released energy, and there's going to be less potential energy. But that less potential energy means it's more stable. It also means it's less organized. So again, we can think about this entropy as a measure of disorder, which the second law of thermodynamics states is always increasing in each reaction. So if we think about entropy in ourselves and our cells, that's what's happening. We're putting a lot of energy into creating that structure that makes up organisms. Organisms are highly structured, so they have low entropy. And you can see because the molecules being built up in this structure are much more structured, have much more potential energy than when they're all disordered. Thinking about what cells are doing, they're building structures from less ordered materials, and that's going to require energy. And then cells are breaking down molecules in order to get that energy out and releasing it. So we can think of all of this as this chemical cycling where energy is going to be always flowing through a system, but the physical energy is going to be not created or destroyed, but transformed as each of those reactions are going. But as each reaction is going, some of the energy is lost in the form of heat. So if we go back to this idea of this food chain, the reason why a food chain can never get too long, there can't be that many different steps, is because each one of these chemical reactions is actually losing most of the energy to heat, to that entropy. Okay, so let's do another example. This time we'll do a little bit more molecular. If we have ethanol with its 2 carbons and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hydrogens and a hydroxyl group, so an oxygen and a hydrogen bonding. So we start with 2 ethanols and then 9 oxygen molecules, so 2 oxygens. And you light it on fire, what do you get? Light. You also break down those carbon-carbon bonds and carbon-hydrogen bonds and carbon-oxygen bonds, and you make water and carbon dioxide. We can give numbers to this and think about that first law of thermodynamics, where if we start with 10 kilocalories of energy in ethanol, and we break it down into 2 molecules of water and carbon dioxide, we get out 3 kilocalories. But we also got all that light. That light and the heat resulted in 7 kilocalories, so that the energy we started with, 10 kilocalories, equals the energy we ended with. It's just not only in those molecules. Most of the energy was lost to heat and light. We can actually graph this. We can graph the amount of free energy. And what does that mean? It means it's the amount of energy available to do work. So we can start with 10 kilocalories in those reactants. And through that reaction, we are going to release energy. There's 3 kilocalories stored in the products and 7 kilocalories given off as light and thermal energy. So it's this change we can see was the free energy change. This is called an exergonic reaction. There is a net release of energy. This is called an exergonic reaction, where their energy is released in the reaction. So then a little quiz you can give yourself is asking yourself, if an exergonic reaction where the energy is being released, which of the following would be true? The reactants contain more energy than the products? Yep, this is higher than this. Energy is given off or released during that reaction, as you can see from this downward slope. But overall, the first law of thermodynamics is always true. So all of those were true. Now if I tell you an endergonic reaction is the exact opposite, where energy is going to go into the reaction, did you ask yourself, what do you think an energy curve would look like? Hopefully you already drew this when you looked at these slides beforehand, where if you're making a graph of the amount of free energy in an endergonic reaction, the products are going to have more energy than the reactants. So the amount of free energy is going to be increased. Energy is going to need to be put in. The example here we have is water and carbon dioxide, and energy in the form of light being put into this reaction to rearrange those molecules, in this case to make sugar, to make glucose. So ask yourself, you can pause it, do you know the answers? The answers are products have more energy compared to the reactants. This is higher than this, which means energy had to get put in. In this case, that first law of thermodynamics, energy isn't being created or destroyed. You have solar energy being converted into chemical energy. So when an energy is released, it's exergonic. When an energy is used, it's endergonic. Energy exiting, exer. Entering, ender. And we're going to see in the next video that on all living systems, its exergonic reactions are combining with endergonic reactions. So in the PowerPoint, I've got a lot more graphics to bring these points home about exergonic reactions and endergonic reactions, which are endergonic using energy, which are those anabolic pathways building things up, requiring energy, and then breaking things down in those catabolic pathways, releasing energy, which is an exergonic reaction. So our last summary and example is thinking about combining this with the information from the laws of thermodynamics and thinking about enthalpy. So if we have this example here where we have the gas of carbon dioxide and water getting converted into building into that glucose molecule, and then taking that glucose molecule and building it into glycogen. We want to be able to think about these molecules in their actual form and thinking about which is more stable, which is less stable, which has more energy, which has less energy. So to build up from this highly disordered or high enthalpy state into this highly structured state, you need to be putting energy in. When our muscles break down glycogen into glucose, we are getting that energy out. When we are breaking down glucose, putting it back in to those simpler gases and water, we are releasing energy. So we can think about synthesis as energy in when we're going from that less ordered state of glucose to that more ordered state of glycogen. And we're breaking down when we're getting that energy out, going from glycogen to glucose. This whole process is metabolism, is the sum of all of these chemical reactions in our body, building things up and breaking things down.